life living and making a living can sometimes wear us out, grind us down, and dull our senses. So for a keen mind and a sharp contributive edge that can make it all easier and better and more productive, let's take some time to sharpen our axe. Stay with us right now for Life Talk.
Hello, I'm Gina Fitt, and you've either surfed to or purposely selected Life Talk with Bern Moses. Welcome to another in our series of ongoing verbal essays brought to you in this television format. It's such a pleasure to have you with us this week. Bern, last week we had a very interesting show. We were talking about life, living, and loving. And we usually talk about life, living, and making a living, and we've had many discussions on how to be more successful in our careers and our business lives. And we talked last week about love. And we've had such interesting phone calls come in over the past week, and so many people struggling in their relationships, specifically their romantic relationships. And we touched briefly on that aspect of love, but we, I think, spent more time focusing on love as a generic term and in a very broad sense what that involves. And so I thought maybe, and this is a challenging topic, that we could spend this half an hour discussing relationships.
One of the things that makes relationships so hard is that we've been told that. You know, you got to work hard at a relationship. You know what I mean? To make it work. And my sense is that you have to work hard at it. It may not be the right one you're working on. You know what I mean? In other words, something is amiss. And always what we have to examine first is ourselves. And that is, what are we bringing to the table? What I talk about a lot in essays and what have you is, don't try to develop a relationship. Relationships really don't work very well. But to work at an relationship. Okay, in other words, relationship would mean that it was elevating, it was ecstatic, it was happy, it was fulfilling, and that's what everybody's looking for. Now, how do you go about doing that? Okay, is to find, okay, it starts out this way. Most people are looking for love.
Yes.
Okay, and they're looking for someone to love them. That's a losing battle. That's a tough one. Because
they're all looking for the same thing.
Yeah, and they have a list sometimes. You know, and they want the man to be so tall and the woman to have a certain size waist, and you know, they have lists. And I can't even imagine going out with a shopping list trying to find someone to love me. The whole thing is kind of messy when you think about that. But the idea is to go out and one thing I used to talk about, a lot of people come to me I have a lot of young people in my life and working with me, and we talk about these things once in a while and say, well, how do you do this? I say to a boy or to a girl, I'll say, okay, understand that a man is looking really for the woman who won't have sex. That's what the man's really looking for. Because what he'd really like to find is a woman just like his mom, who certainly was a virgin when she got married. You know what I'm saying? In other words, he wants a girl just like the girl that married dear old dad. Okay, deep down inside, they want the girl who won't. Not who don't or who never will, but who's going to be very reserved about it and very selective about it. That's essentially what a man really wants. Now, a lot of them will scoff at that and say, oh, no, not me. But deep down inside, that's what we all want. However, what men will do is to test. Because oftentimes they will make their physical moves and what have you, hoping to, quote, score. And if they do, then that relationship can be diminished. Typically, I've told people in like some dating coaching that I've done in the past, is that in 3 dates, the dynamics of the relationship, if there's to be one, has been established. And those one person is accommodating another, one person is manipulating, one person is surrendering. You know, I mean, all those things begin to happen within 3 dates. It doesn't take long. And then there's an adaptation that begins to take place. People beginning to adapt to one another. And finding a great deal of pleasure in the very things that later will aggravate them. You know what I mean? Because what they're doing is in the adaptation process, they're excusing, accommodating all kinds of behaviors, thinking, well, that'll either change or isn't that endearing because they want the relationship so bad. I would tell people, go out and find a lot of people who are interesting to you. In other words, whether it's a man or a woman, go out and find a whole lot of people to love. Now, we're not talking sex here. We're talking because how many people can you love? You can love a lot of people.
Unlimited number.
Unlimited
I believe,
number.
Yeah.
Go out and see, the lover is the one who wins. So, the lover wins. Go out and find people to love, okay? Some will respond, some won't. If you love them, it doesn't matter. It's okay, because there's no expectation. You just love them for the pure joy of loving them, okay? Sooner or later, you may narrow that down to one person who seems somehow to love you without the same reservation that you're extending. Someone who is patient when you're impatient, or allows you to be patient when they're impatient. You mean, in other words, that there is this sort of blending of this. Then you can begin to narrow this down and become what normally we call a friend, okay? And then if the chemistry is still there, in other words, if the sparks are still flying, you may have something special. Here's the thing, when you go into a relationship, there's a question that should be in the back of your mind. If something occurred where I could never have sex with this person, would I still love this person and would I be happy with them? And so, in other words, if you could say yes to that, you may have something special, especially if you really are impassioned by them. Because if you have that combination, you've got something that can really, really be explosive and durable. I think too often, though, that, for example, if let's take a man or woman, doesn't make any difference, but let's take a girl who has not had the attention of her father, who has not had a lot of love in her life, and somehow feels incomplete about that, and we would. I mean, you're going to feel incomplete if you haven't been held and nurtured and spoken to in that way, that the first person who comes along who says, I love you, okay, and who puts their arm around you, you just melt. You know what I mean? And to realize that, hey, this is not, healthy. This really is not healthy. It's a matter of patience, awareness, taking our time, and letting it occur. Typically, I think a lot of people are going to say, well, this is not true, that men want a woman who won't. Okay? But women, I think, on the other hand, want men who will try and accept the no. I mean, there's sort of that little balance in there, sort of a regard for one another. And when that occurs, then something special can happen. I think if we can separate sex and love, that's first step. If we can separate those two. Because if you mix them up, you mess up both of them.
Right.
You can really get nasty out there. Sex is an interesting thing. I think sometime we ought to do a whole show on it. In fact, we might be able to, because I'll tell you, that's one of the major issues in establishing relationships. So maybe it doesn't hurt to talk about some of those things. But we do know this. I think I'm going to go ahead with this, Gina. There we go. You can't talk about sex. And I think a lot of young people should hear this. You really shouldn't be talking about sex or engaging in sex, okay, without understanding the sociology of sex, okay, the psychology of sex, the philosophy of sex, the theology of sex, the pathology of sex. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, yes.
Pathology of sex.
You've got my interest, Bern.
The physiology of sex. Let's see. Sociology, psychology, philosophy, theology, pathology, physiology. I would say at least that, and maybe others, but I have been a long time since I've done this. But it's so complex that all of these things are impacted by that act. It's fascinating. Sociology. We're not sophisticated enough in our society to really accommodate those people who choose to live together or people who are promiscuous. I mean, society is not prepared to honor that. There is a sociology involved here. And when you engage in that kind of thing, you stand outside the mainstream and set yourself up for a whole lot of pain. We know that. There's too much evidence of that. The philosophy of sex, the things that we've been talking about, another philosophy, having a preciousness about it, an understanding about it. It's a psychology of sex, what's going on in the mind and all the maneuverings that take place. The theology, how is this going to weigh out with your God if you have one? Okay, because it's there. We've been brought up with a certain heritage, and we keep violating that, and that's what makes the relationship work hard.
Do you think if we're raised with a certain moral ethic or code, say that precludes sex outside of marriage, and we reject that, we reject the teaching of our parents or our church, and we decide that we're going to pursue that kind of a lifestyle anyway, do you think there's still kind of those little ripples or echoes of conscience that
I don't think there's any question about it.
that
It gets in there.
maybe taints the relationship?
Has to. It
And
has to.
there's some resentment there between the two partners for allowing you to do that?
Good point. Pathology is the big one that we hear a lot about today. The pathology of sex, the fact that the evidence is pretty clear that promiscuity has a price to pay, in that there's huge numbers of venereal diseases. The other day I was reading about the chlamydia, rampant in this country, and it comes from promiscuity. It does not occur, okay, in a mating couple. In other words, when people bond together and live together, this does not occur. All your other venereal diseases, of course HIV now, and AIDS and what have you is a major thing. But in spite of that, because we have been not prepared for it, people allowed the biology of sex to dominate. Okay, it's biology. In other words, two people come together of any age. We have to understand that. It doesn't have to be a young, sprightly couple. All the way up to 70s and 80s and 90s, people come together and they sexually bond. The hypothalamus gives no account to age. Okay, it wants to propagate. Okay, and at any age, people come together, juices flow, and they may have sex because of it. In other words, if they let that take over. And then if there's a baby that's born, we call it a miracle. Now, I enjoy little babies as much as anybody, but all of this, biologically, cockroaches do it, and rats do it, and horses and dogs do it. It's not that big a thing. We got to keep it in its place. The biology is very, very powerful. And understand that the drive comes from what did I call it? The hypothalamic chaos that wants to propagate. It can't see, hear, feel, smell, or taste. It doesn't care about the socio-economic circumstances. In other words, the drive...
Or the emotional, spiritual...
Yeah, it doesn't care about that. It just wants to make another brain. It doesn't care about anything. And so if we're not aware, if we're not conscious, we surrender to that, and then we have to live with the consequences. It can be terrible. And at the same time can be wonderful if it's approached philosophically, theologically, sociologically. In other words, if when we come to the table properly or go to the bed properly, the biology and the consequence of it is, incredible. Nothing more joyful than a child when it's wanted and loved and again, can be cared for. Just incredible.
Can we talk just a minute about the psychology of love? Because I think that's where a lot of us get hung up and misunderstand and misinterpret what a true romantic love relationship can be or is about, or how it should work, or how it's defined.
I think I'm stuck here when we start getting into that, the psychology, praxeology of love. Okay, praxeology. In other words, to have, say you're stimulated by someone. Think, wow, I might love this person.
But is
Maybe
that
I could
love,
love them forever.
or is that just interest?
Okay, this starts biologically. Okay, you get fascinated by the image, by the manner, and it starts here. And say, okay, now is the time to put this in its proper place.
They have great buns or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's pretty primal. Okay, once that's there, say, okay, what is this about? Could I love this person in an agape sense? In other words, could I be patient with all the things they may do ineffectually and inappropriately? Am I prepared to be kind? Am I prepared to be transparent and open? Am I prepared to be generous with my fortune, my estate, and my time and attention? And those understanding the fact that agape love is the only kind worth applying to a relationship. Okay, in other words, am I prepared to be courteous? Is this kind of person that I want to do this with? And not expecting anything in return. Remember, in other words, if we can reduce the expectations, my gift is my love, okay? And I want it for this person. And then you focus yourself in that direction with numbers of them, absent of the sex, but with numbers of them, and sooner or later you're going to find someone who just responds in kind.
I think that's something
initiates in kind.
I think that's something that's crucial.
Oh.
Absolutely crucial is the responding in kind.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of posturing. I'll give you this if you'll give me that, which we talked about, the philos.
Mm-hmm.
And we seem to settle and bargain in relationships instead of reach and stretch and aspire. And I always like the statement, if you want to have the one, you've got to be the one.
Exactly.
But we spend all our time checking off the list for them, and how much time do we spend checking off the list of who we are?
I think what happens in a relationship is more important than the people.
Yeah.
No, it's so important to have a relationship, to not be alone. It's unacceptable societally to be alone. Fortunately, no longer true. And as we have matured a little bit societally, where a person can be comfortable being alone. I've done it, and I've been comfortable there. It's more fun if you can enjoy someone, but you got to enjoy someone.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't imagine hanging out with someone day after day that you are totally in discord with.
But how many of us
Just
do
unbelievable.
that?
Oh.
But how many of us do that?
You understand
for
why
years
now.
and years and years.
Yeah, you understand why now, because the hypothalamic region will adapt to it.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't care.
I think it was really important what you said to start out with numbers of people, because obviously if you have bigger numbers to choose from, your chances of getting someone that's a good fit really works. But if you only ever dated one or two people and they're just someone that you saw across a crowded room and it was all hocus pocus, you know, and
that's something we got to get past. Is there's someone for everyone. You know what I mean? In other words, for every woman there's a man, or every man there's a woman. Bad philosophy. You know what I mean? Because I'm convinced, I'm confident that I could be happily engaged with, happily married to, on the planet, oh, geez, probably several million women.
yeah.
And I am, I'm not that potent. You know what I mean? Yeah, but because as the lover, there's a lot of nice people out here that you could devote yourself to and find pleasure with. There's no question. And I think to look for that one, that is where it's dangerous, because if you find someone that biologically stimulates you and sociologically it seems appropriate, why, you almost create love. You say, I love this person. You jump right to it because of the need for the relationship. And if you have numbers of them. Now, granted, you have to find, a lot of people won't tolerate that, and you need to find that out. Say, for example, if I'm communicating with you, extending myself to you with courtesy and kindness and patience, trying to get to know who you are and letting you know who I am, and you don't allow me to do that with Diane, or with Joanne, or with Sue, or with, it goes on, then maybe you're not the one. You know what I mean? Because if you let that philos and eros get in there, you're dangerous to me.
The possessiveness, the aggressiveness,
that's right.
the selfishness.
However, since most people don't have the tools, you have to communicate about those things. You have to let people know what you're up to, what your intentions are. Now, you violate all of this, by the way, this experimentation, this development of a friendship and what have you, when you submit to the biological urgings. In other words, you violate all of this. Now, sometimes it works. Sometimes we're lucky. Sometimes you can meet someone, be impassioned, be in bed in no time at all, and it all work out. Fibber McGee and Molly. You ever hear of Fibber McGee and Molly? You've never heard of? Oh, gee, I've just aged myself. Fibber McGee and Molly had a radio show years ago and was America's happy couple. In other words, they'd been married forever, and they had this radio show. It was delightful. You've never heard of Fibber McGee's Closet? He would open it up and everything would come tumbling out? Oh, gee whiz. Anyway.
You're dating me, Bern.
Yeah. But anyway, they met one day before he left overseas to fight in World War II. They met at a USO kind of a thing. I don't know if it's called USO in World War I or not, but they met one day, essentially fell in love. He left. They communicated by mail and what have you. He returned from the war. They married and lived happily ever after. That's unusual. And I don't know that they had sex here either. Probably not, because that's just something that wasn't occurring back in those days the way it does now. But they fell in love, and they found out about each other, and truly fell in love, and then got married and continued forever. It was one of the great romances of, probably 40, 50 years ago. You know what I mean? And I can't imagine how you can't remember. No, it's not.
Thanks, Vern.
But yeah, I've seen that happen before. I know my first wife, I fell in love the first time I saw her. You know what I mean? And so did she, but not forever. You know what I mean? And yet forever. Really strange how those things work out. There was still some experimenting evidently to do, and that didn't work out after a long, long time, and 3 children and all kinds of crazy stuff. But it's fascinating. I would say move easily and quietly and carefully into the good life, because once you find a good person to communicate with and to listen to and what have you, and to work on a relationship, it can be pretty wonderful. Relationship, what I mean is typically a relationship, 2 people come together with expectations, each one kind of posturing for power and getting the upper hand, and there's nowhere to go but down in that. I mean, there's nowhere to go but down. But when 2 people come together to elevate one another, in other words, if we came together and my sole purpose was to confirm you and to love you and to elevate you and to applaud you and to support you in every way that I possibly could, and somehow knew that you were doing that for me, there's nowhere to go but up. Nowhere to go but up. And that's what I mean by relationship. There's 2 people coming together, support one another, to contribute to one another, to be patient with one another. Gosh, I mean, where can you go from there? See?
Vern, the things you said made me think of 2 questions. First of all, people grow at different rates and at different times, and often when you're in a long-term relationship, one of the partners will grow, have a whole new way of thinking, and they'll be doing things differently, while the other person hasn't or isn't ready to go that way, to that direction. What do you do in that circumstance?
I think we've moved to a place in our society, whether I don't like to admit this or not, when
normally we just part company.
Yeah, when these kinds of things might exist for 7 or 8 years, these are relationships might exist for 7 or 8 years, and then there's a parting of the ways. You know the 7-year itch? It's a fairly, I would think, almost philosophical, maybe biological, maybe psychological, sociological impact that society has on people these days. There's no question that if one person is growing and the other person, like, they won't go to the seminar, they won't read a book, they won't communicate, they, you know what I mean, they're stuck in the mud.
Yeah.
Boy, they both get unhappy.
Yeah.
This one gets afraid they're going to lose this one. This gets bored with that. It's very difficult. The only way that, like I say, if you don't have mature people, both who are willing to understand, to examine, and to reach for, and primarily to communicate, just talk about this stuff. How many people have gone on dates, got into a relationship, had a sexual relationship, and maybe even got married, and haven't talked about it as much as you and I have this evening? I mean, we haven't even...
Probably a number of people.
Yeah. I mean, they're going to football games and watching TV and going to bed. I mean, that's the extent of it.
So it requires the communication and patience on the part of the one, and a willingness on the part of the other to explore new ideas and possibilities, because they're committed to the relationship and to the other person.
And to look for and find the common denominators rather than the differences. It's kind of like, I mean, I enjoy, what is it, men are from Mars and women are from Venus, but the sense is there that we're separating people again. You know what I mean? And the idea is to find ways to bring us together, to find our common bonds, so that we, see, I think, ever since I can remember, that they've been promoting the battle of the sexes, and it need not exist. It need not exist. And by the way, a intellectual, practical, thoughtful relationship does not have to be void of passion. You know what I mean? One would think that if you get too academic about it, you're going to spoil the spontaneity of it. I don't think that's true.
I think it creates more room for spontaneity, because there's more revelation, there's more sharing, there's more
understanding. Then, as a product of this one, there's offspring. What chance do those kids have?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well,
incredible.
It's horrible for children when their parents are moving on every 7 years to new relationships. They're deprived of the stability they need to grow up and become the kind of adults we're talking about with the kind of relationships we all want to have. Then my second question, Bern, was what if you find that you're in a relationship where you feel like you're giving and giving and giving, and you're trying to do the unconditional agape sort of love, and it's not being reciprocated? What do you do?
What would you do?
Well,
I mean, it has to be okay to move on. So that's why I say if you get into a marriage too quickly, then, boy, I tell you, you've made yourself a commitment. You know what I'm saying? But if you haven't gotten into the marriage, and this is not working here, it ain't going to get better after you're married. I mean, it's not going to get better unless that person is willing to go and get an objective outside view on these things. See, a lot of times people say, well, this is our relationship, we can work on it, solve it ourselves. Never true, because that's too subjective a thing. Okay, it takes an outside party to coach and to counsel and advise, and sometimes, very probably, painfully perhaps, they would say, look, you people need to move in different directions, because we're talking about a major issue here. I mean, you're talking, those years do get lengthy. You know, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10, 20, 30 years. I mean, that's, you better use some caution, some awareness about what you're doing. You know?
Well, who was it that said a problem could never be solved at the same level of thinking at which it was created?
Einstein contributed something to that one, I think.
So at times I think it is important to get input from others.
That's right. Life, living, and loving tonight on Life Talk. Boy, I tell you, there's a whole lot of alliteration there, isn't there? Life Talk, and my name is Bern. I'm at 1-800-661-3490, and if someone will call, we'll send them out tickets to a essay and send them a schedule of the TV shows when they're on and a bunch of other paraphernalia that's quite interesting, a schedule of events, and be glad that they call. And let's see, my last name,
Moses,
and you're Gina Fitt. Thank you, Gina.
Thank you, Bern.